all over the world, and this time the theme being the women in space. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Dhanya MD. She is a scientist at Vikram Sarabhai Space Center, especially in the Space Physics Laboratory. And without taking much of your time, I invite Dr. Umesh Kumar Rastagi. He is a head of education at Nehru Science Center to officially introduce us our today's speaker. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Chintamani. Good morning and welcome you all once again to this very special event, World Space Week. Space research and all those things, they have given us so much. In fact, we have a gallery on aerospace and having one particular information on space spin-offs. And when you go through those, you'll find that it has really given so much to us. Celebration to banta hai. It's like that. And we are celebrating this, and with as Chintamani has told, on the special theme of women in space. So let me introduce today's speaker, Dr. Dhanya. Dr. M.B. Dhanya is her full name. He's a scientist F, as already told, at Planetary Science Branch in Space Physics Laboratory of Vikram Sarabhai Space Center in, it's a part of ISRO, no doubt, in Thiruvananthapuram. She is basically in the research field, which is associated with solar wind and its interaction with the different solar system objects, planetary atmosphere, solar flares, solar wind interaction with the Earth's moon, atmosphere of moon. And she had her PhD also in a similar field, means solar wind and its interaction while doing the projects on Chandrayaan. She has been associated with very important projects, like a co-investigator in SARA, which is Sub-Key Atom Reflecting Analyzer, experiments on Chandrayaan-1, the first Indian lunar mission, we all know that. Deputy Project Manager, MENCA, MENCA, which is Mars Exospheric Composition Analyzer on Mars Orbiter Mission, MOM, shortly written as the first Indian Mars mission. She was also associated with project manager of CHASE-2, which is Chandra's Altitudinal Composition Explorer 2, which is experiment on Chandrayaan-2. The second Indian lunar mission, project manager with PAPA. It's a name, acronym for Plasma Analyzer Package. Experiments on the Indian Aditya L1 mission, a mission which is coming up now. Then she has been awarded and got honors and recognition for several things. Just to name a few of them, Beauty Foundation Award 2019 for outstanding contribution in the field of plasma science and technology. Then Young Research Award by the Association of Asia Pacific Physical Societies in December 2016. ISRO Young Scientist Merit Award for the year 2014. The Best Paper Award for Young Scientists at 19th National Space Science Symposium in February 2016. Similar award at 20th Kerala Science Congress. One more on the same category, National Space Science Museum in Symposium in 2014. She had chaired the session on scientific event, which was on lunar science and exploration at 40th COSPER Scientific Assembly in Moscow State University in 2014. Again, a Best Paper Award at National Space Science Symposium in 2010. Soras University, Rajkot in February 2010. For the best paper, first results from SARA experiments on Chandrayaan-1 mission. Then ISRO Team Excellent Award for Chandrayaan-1 in 2008. CSIR Research Fellowship in 2006. She has publication which have been referred in 25 journals, and her credit also presentations at national and international conferences, symposia, which is almost 50 in number. So we have really a very distinguished scientist, a young scientist, I should say. Invite now Dr. Dhanya to take over and start her deliberation. Dr. Dhanya, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And first of all, I thank the organizers the Space Geeks and the Nehru Science Center, especially Chintamani Pai and then Umesh Rastagi for nicely coordinating this event. And thanks for giving me such an opportunity to interact with this kind of a group in the occasion of the World Space Week. And then I thank my friend and colleague Ankush Bhaskar from my department who initiated these discussions, and so thanks to Ankush as well. So, and then I thank for the nice introduction. And so with this introduction, I guess the audience get a feel that I'll be talking mostly about the anyway planetary, related to planetary missions and about the planets. So I have organized a talk in that way, and I have tried to make it into as simple as possible. So wherever you find some glitches or where you find it bit, not up to the level, you can always ask me those things during the Q&A session. So thank you. So with this, I will start my presentation. So I'm just sharing my screen. And I believe my presentation is visible.
Yes, we can see.
Yes, ma'am, your presentation is visible.
Yeah, now it's full screen also.
Full screen also. Okay, thank you. Okay, so today I would like to introduce some aspects of our planetary world, which is basically some part of our solar system to you. And since this is in the context of World Space Week, I have kept one slide to summarize this event. And this anyway, all of you would be knowing already that we celebrate World Space Week during October 4th to 10th of every year. And October 4 is chosen because it is the launch of our first artificial satellite, which is a Sputnik one, which gave the humanity such a confidence that we can reach the space. So that is the boost we got to the humanity. And so it's a very important day. And then, as you all know, then there were several, launches from different countries, and then it was like a competition, and then several attempts were done. And after almost like 10 years, then there was a treaty to use the outer space for the peaceful means. So that marks, although it is after 10 years, the date is very important, and it marks the end of the week of the Space Week. And as you know, it is celebrated worldwide. And in India, we celebrate under the auspice of ISRO. And in Kerala, we celebrate under the guideship of VSSC. And then we have various programs for school and college students and even public also. And then the theme of the Space Week changes every year. And this year, as you all know, the theme is the Women in Space, which is very relevant in the era of women empowerment. Okay. With a small introduction, now I'll go to my main topic. So as we all know, we are part of solar system. We live on Earth. And Earth is it moves around the sun. So, and we are a family which is called the solar system. The solar system consists of sun, several planets, and other components, which I come to later. And where we are, we are on Earth, and it is very important that we are so unique. But now our solar system is a part of a big group, which is a galaxy, which is Milky Way galaxy. So in Milky Way galaxy is nothing but a group of stars and then dust, gas, and similar constituents. So there are several stars in a galaxy, and this galaxy, structure of the galaxy is like a spiral, and our solar system is on one arm of the galaxy. So you can see sun here. So we are residing here. Now, coming to the solar system, this is a view of the solar system where we have sun as our energy source. The solar system's center is the sun, and which provides us the energy, and we are bound to sun by the gravitational force. And this shows the planets in the varying distance, the increasing distance from the sun. So closest is Mercury, then Venus, then Earth, then comes Mars, then Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And as you can see, their size also as in these four are bigger in size compared to these four. And so these four planets are called inner planets, and these four are called the outer planets. So inner and outer is a way of saying this, considering this as a boundary, like it is closer to the sun and this is farther to the sun, farthest from the sun. And another importance is that these four have almost rocky surface, like on earth we see rocks on the surface, and then we have the clay, soil, different soil types. Likewise, these four planets have hard rock surface, whereas these four are called gas giant. They are composed of mostly gases, so they are actually gaseous bodies. And another important fact is, or a unique feature is, out of these four planets, Earth only has a unique satellite, and which is a natural satellite, which is called Moon. A satellite, as you know, planet moves around the star, whereas a satellite moves around a planet. So a Moon moves around Earth. And so you may wonder, yeah, okay, we know that Mars has two satellites. So some of you would have heard that. So Mars has two satellites, which is Phobos and Deimos. They are called Phobos and Deimos. But when you compare Moon with the Phobos and Deimos, Moon is spherical in shape, whereas Phobos and Deimos are like irregular rock pieces. So they are most like a potato. We can say that they are like potato shapes. So one hypothesis is that these potato-shaped objects are basically from, there you can see something here, which is called the asteroid belt. So between the orbit of Mars and Jupiter, we have a belt which consists of mostly rock fragments, and that is called the asteroid belt. So these potatoes are some rock fragments from the asteroid belt, which is captured by the Mars because of the gravitational force, and then they start revolving around Mars. So they are more, like acquired satellite, like captured satellite. Whereas if we see Moon is a perfect spherical body, and it is like it qualifies the conventional view of the satellite, or the established criteria of a satellite. So in that way also we can say that our Moon, Earth's Moon, is very unique out of the four satellites, which is out of the four inner planets. This is the unique satellite, and it is attached to Earth. So when we go to the outer planetary world, we can find that they have several satellites, many, more than 10 satellites. So, and some are spherical in shape, and some are irregular shapes, like that. So the number of satellites are also more as we go in the outer planetary world. And then apart from that, we in the solar system, as I told about asteroid belt, we have a similar belt in the outside the orbit of Neptune, and that is called the Kuiper belt. Kuiper belt is nothing but, again, something similar to the asteroid belt. It consists of fragments, rock pieces, but they are at this distance, the temperature is very low. So they are like frozen objects. So mostly ice covered body. The ice need not be water ice, it can be gaseous, any ice of any gas. So they are frozen bodies. So this belt is Kuiper belt, and the orbit of Pluto lies within the Kuiper belt. And then, so now we know that there are some categories called the dwarf planet, because we know it much, we are much familiar because of Pluto. Pluto is now considered as a dwarf planet. So in the Kuiper belt, we have Pluto, then another satellite called Eris, Pluto and Eris. Eris is another dwarf planet, and then we have Ceres in the asteroid belt. So because they look like a planet, they are spherical in shape. That means they have achieved some equilibrium. The only one, and they revolve around the sun. And the only one condition in which they are considered as dwarf planet is because their orbit is not free from other obstacles. Like if you see in the orbit of Jupiter or Saturn, they are clean. There are no other obstacles on their way, whereas these objects have their orbit within a bunch of other minor bodies. The same with the case of Ceres. So these are are the that's why they are classified as the make Humia. Like now new more candidates are coming because of our observation techniques have improved. Then apart from this, then we have comets in the solar system. So comets are nothing but objects coming from Kuiper belt, and they are, as I said, they are frozen. So because some, and they are like they are like in bunches here. So at some point of time, because of some gravitational perturbations, they enter into our solar system. So once they come into the solar system, come close to the sun, then they get heated up. Once they get heated up, their gas get released, the vapor get released, and then they form a structure like this. So these bodies are called comets. And this is not alone. And this shows the scale, distance scale from the sun to the earth. This is the standard. Generally, we use to measure our like mobile phone size. Smartphone size. We may use centimeter as the scale, and to measure the size of a table, we may use meter, and to say distance, as we say kilometer. And the kilometer distance between sun and earth is so large that it is considered a new unit is used to represent these distances, and that is astronomical unit. So one astronomical unit is actually, it is the distance between the sun and earth, and it is approximately, we can say, 10 raised to 8 kilometers. So it is such a big quantity. And then we can see sun, earth, and then distance of Mars, and you can find the asteroid belt here. Then Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Pluto is in the Kuiper belt. And then it is not, our solar system doesn't stop there. When you go further from the Pluto, you can find that there is another thing called the Oort cloud. So Oort cloud is again a cloud consists of dust, gas, and like rock fragments, which is encircling the solar system, and its distance is something like 10,000 astronomical unit. And this is the way the Oort cloud, circles encircle the solar system. And beyond the Oort cloud, then we enter the area called the interstellar space. Like we go to next star, the area of, or say the domain of the next star, like other than the sun. So from the Oort cloud, we get long period comets, very, very long period comets. So these are again, as you would guess, that these are at very low temperatures. And here, because of the gravitational perturbation of nearby stars, some of them can come into the solar system, and their orbital period will be so large that they are called the long period comets. Now, as we all know, sun, the energy source of Earth is sun. So sun emit radiation in all wavelength, like it is called electromagnetic radiation. And so it has different components like radio, infrared, visible, up to gamma rays, and they provide the energy to sustain life and other processes on the Earth. And this is called the curve, radiation curve, which okay, you can just we can consider that okay, there is some peak, means a peak happens in the visible radiation. That's why we can see many things with our naked eye. Okay, so other than that, when we consider this curve, which is like an ideal curve, we see that in the ultraviolet is the short wavelength, we say, in the terms of, or in the terms of frequency, with a high frequency, their energy content or the intensity. This axis we can consider the intensity is nothing but the amount of radiation. So the amount of radiation is less in the shorter wavelength part. But when it comes to when we see this in very microscopic detail, that is shown here. So here you can ignore all these axes. Only thing which we will consider is this part is similar to this part. This is what it is shown here. What we will see here is this part only, where you can see that, where here we think that okay, it falls down very nicely. But here we see that they show some change, amount of radiation changes here. Like, they don't really go down. They have some value here. Basically, there is some amount of radiation coming in this. And these are, and you can see certain terms like flare is written here. So these are nothing but sun emit, what we get is from the sun only. So now we understand that, so sun emits something in this band also, but at some point of time, which is related to some activities on the sun. So that's what I'm going to tell. Like everyone of us have some routine things, and like human have a life cycle. Likewise, sun also has certain activities and the cycle. So that is called the solar activity. And let us see, in the normal, when we see the sun with our naked eye, we may see very smooth sun in the visible light at some point of time. After certain time, when we see some dark patches on the sun, which are called the sunspots. So sunspots are they appear dark anyway, isn't it? So they are at the low temperatures, and this visible part of the surface of the sun is called the photosphere. What we see with the eye. Photosphere has a temperature of something like 5,000 to 6,000 Kelvin. And these spots are slightly at lower temperatures. And these spots number, these are called sunspots, and the number changes. And the importance of sunspot is that there are some processes or some activities on the sun which happen associated with these sunspots. Like the term flare, which as seen in the previous slide, is related to this. So this appearance we have given a name, like the solar activity is minimum when we don't see any sunspot here, and it is maximum when there are this is towards the maximum when there are many such spots. So this sunspot, as we see, their number changes. So it is like this. In the previous one, we saw the image of the sun in visible, as we see from the with the naked eye. Now, if we see sun in ultraviolet radiation, this is such an appearance. So here we can see that here almost like it is very uniform. Then gradually some brightness is seen here. This just we can see there is some, it is more bright. So there is something happening here, some activity, and then comes here maximum and then go back. So this periodicity is something like 11-year. So the solar activity has a 11-year cycle, we say. Why we say activity is, as I mentioned before, associated, as you can see from the brightness, associated with this, there are some kind of activities happening on the sun. So then this shows the sunspot number as a function of year. So where we can see that the sunspot number increases, decreases, increases, decreases, etc. So this one cycle is called the solar cycle, and it has roughly 11-year period. So solar, during one cycle, the sunspot starts from the minimum value, reaches higher, and then falls back. So the associated with such sunspots and solar activity, we see solar flares, which is nothing but the emission of or some explosion happening on the sun, because of which we get large amount of radiation, and that is the one causes the yes. Hello.
We can hear
am
you.
I not?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're audible. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, in between someone called intervene, so I thought whether I'm stuck.
No.
Lights are stuck. Okay. So associated with some explosions, some explosion happening on the sun, associated with that we get radiation in different wavelength, and like ultraviolet, X-rays, like that. That is the one which caused the increase in intensity, which I showed in one of the previous slides. And then we have the coronal mass ejection, which is, this corona is not the corona which is a terror to all of us now. This is the solar corona. Solar corona is nothing but the outermost part of the solar atmosphere. So as we see, this is the cross-sectional view of the sun. So core, and then we have the convective and radiation zone through which the energy from the core comes to the surface. And the visible part of the surface is called photosphere. And then we have another layer called chromosphere, above which this extended atmosphere is called the corona. So from the corona, we see that there is a huge ejection of mass. That is called the coronal mass ejection. This also is associated with the solar activity. So now we know that, okay, sun has some activity, and the sun, when sun is active, many things happen. But what happens when sun is, in the minima or in the normal scenario? So there is always something is coming out of the sun, which is called the solar wind. So as we, we know, and as shown also, we know that sun never stops emitting radiation, isn't it? Because of activity, there is some modulation in the radiation and the amount of radiation. But at any point of time, sun doesn't stop emitting radiation. In that way, that is like every all the time. So something like that, there is all the time some other than radiation. There are some particles also comes out of the sun. That is called the solar wind. The particles, in the sense, they are basically charged particles. They have positive and negative charges. So it is a supersonic flow of plasma from the sun. The charged particles, they are called, the population is called a plasma, and they emanate from the sun. And typical speed is 400 kilometers per second. So roughly they travel 400 kilometers in every second. So we say, our cars, speed of the car, we say kilometer per hour, like 40, 80, 100 kilometer per hour. And the super, cyclonic storms on Earth, we say like greater than 200 kilometer per hour. So everything we talk in terms of per hour. This is such a velocity that we talk in terms of speed, that we talk in terms of per second. So it travels roughly 400 kilometers in 1 second. So it is a very fast flow. And they consist of 96% of protons, and then 4% of doubly ionized helium. And then they are, because I told they are charged particles. So they are, and in the universe, hydrogen and helium are the prominent one. So as the case with the sun as well. So sun, when it emit, sun is at very high temperatures. So this hydrogen is ionized. And so these ionized hydrogen comes out of the sun as part of the solar wind. And then comes helium is also doubly ionized. That is 4%. And then we have heavier ions, we are less in number. And then there are electrons as well. And such a flow, when it, like we know, when we get radiation, it heat up our Earth atmosphere, heat up the Earth surface, those kind of things. So what happens when the solar wind comes out of the sun? They pass through the interplanetary space. Interplanetary space is the area between the planets, isn't it? So they interact with the planets, not only planets, all the objects, like even asteroid, comets, everything. And they interact with that. And that is the one you may have heard, that there is a tilt in the tail of the comet. That tilt in the tail of the comet is caused by the solar wind. So solar wind is, people came to know solar wind in indirect ways, because this is basically a flow of particles, so which we cannot see with the naked eye. So people came to know by indirect, methods. And then when these particles comes out, they drag the magnetic field of sun along with them, and that magnetic field also passes, through the solar system, and that component is called the interplanetary magnetic field. So when this is like an artistic view, when the solar wind comes out of the sun, then it hits the planet, and there can be several, processes happening around the planet. And that process varies from planet to planet because it depends on certain parameters. Before going into that, we'll consider one more aspect. When the solar wind comes out of the sun and then pass through the solar system, finally it go beyond the orbit of Pluto, and then at some point of time it encounters the pressure from the interstellar wind. As you know, when the solar wind is like, it's a flow of, it's like a flow, so we can consider it as a fluid. So, and it has particles have velocity and they have a mass, so they have momentum. So it is like a pressure when they flow, and at some point of time they meet the pressure from the interstellar wind, from the other outside the system, solar system, and at some point of time then they interact and stop. They get halted, and this that defines the heliosphere boundary. You'd have heard this term heliosphere, which is very prominent nowadays. So this heliosphere is nothing but it is a volume bound by the heliopause. Heliopause is a place where the solar wind faces, faces opposition from the interstellar wind, and finally it stops and diverts at some point of time, and that is our solar system. It defines the heliosphere of our solar system. Now, okay, so now coming back to the solar wind interaction, as I mentioned, it interacts with the planet, and the interaction changes depending on whether the planet have a magnetic field or atmosphere. So why that is important? Because when we consider the case of Earth has a very strong magnetic field, which is like a dipole magnetic field. We say dipole is nothing but it has north and south polarity. Most of you, even you would have used a fridge magnet. So magnet, you are all familiar. So you have to just consider that it has two poles, like north and south pole. So Earth has a very strong magnetic field, and is we say strength is something like 35,000 nanotesla. So when because Earth has magnetic field, when the solar wind comes, Earth's magnetic field blocks the solar wind and then divert the flow. Because of which only we don't really, in our daily life, though we are familiar, we see the effect of radiation, but we don't really see the effect of solar wind. But what happens is that at some places, the particles find some passage and they penetrate into the Earth atmosphere. So once they penetrate into the Earth atmosphere is nothing but the gaseous envelope around the Earth, around a planet. And we know Earth atmosphere, we are familiar with the nitrogen, oxygen, the components, and we are breathing because of the atmosphere. Those things we are familiar. So when these particles enters the Earth atmosphere at some altitude, they collide with the atmospheric molecules and atoms. They excite, de-excite them, and they emit radiation. And this radiation is what we see as the beautiful aurora on the night sky, especially at the high latitude. When towards the pole, people see more this phenomena, because the channeling happens mostly close to the pole, so it mostly come to the high latitude region. So from the aurora, which is invisible radiation, it will come. All of you would have seen aurora pictures where you can see the radiation in green light and then very beautiful colors, so which captures the eye. So people started thinking, okay, why aurora happens, what causes this, and then finally those kind of searches established that okay, sun not only emit radiation but particles also, that too continuously. This is a continuous emission of particles. Now we consider another category. Okay, let the planet if the planet doesn't have a magnetic field, then what will happen? But it has atmosphere. Examples are like Mars and Venus. So when it has atmosphere and there is no magnetic field, when the solar wind comes, then there is no field to stop them. But in this case, when a planet has an atmosphere, the solar radiation enters a planet. When they enter the planetary atmosphere, the photons collide with or interact with the molecules or atoms in the atmosphere, and they ionize them. They remove one electron from the atoms and they ionize them. So such a layer of ions are present in the atmosphere of any planet, and such a layer is called the ionosphere because it is composed of charged particles. So now when the solar wind comes, they are charged particle. When it comes, there is a layer of ionosphere, ions here. So these they interact, and the ionosphere basically blocks the solar wind and forms a structure, and then protects as we can say, like protects the planet. But unlike the case of Earth, where this is stopped at very large distance, in the case of Mars and Venus, the solar wind can penetrate closer to the planet, not to the surface, but in case it can access surface also, but mostly it is stopped at some altitude above the surface. And this kind of a structure is called the magnetosphere. In this that is a terminology, magnetosphere. And here it is called induced magnetosphere because such a structure is induced by the atmosphere, ionosphere of the planet. Now we come to a very special case. What is so special about Earth's moon? Moon does not have a magnetic field like a global magnetic field, like a dipole magnetic field. Moon doesn't have that. And another special feature is moon does not have a thick atmosphere. Moon has some atmosphere, but it is very feeble when we consider the atmosphere of the other planets. So but then what will happen in such a case? So you may find it very simple, right? Because then in that case, solar wind can directly hit the surface of the moon. That's it, because there is nothing to stop them. So this shows the sun, earth, moon geometry. So moon moves around earth, sun is here. So if the solar wind affects earth, it is supposed to affect the moon as well. So this is the simple case, like an illustration. No global magnetic field and no substantial atmosphere. So then solar wind comes, interacts with the moon, and then earth, this shows earth. So then what happens, then this shows the orbit of moon around the earth. So then what happens, this is the we zoom in into this section. So this is the day side and this is the night side. So what happens, we expect that, okay, the solar wind is like moon surface is something like a spongy object, acts like a spongy object. So the solar wind is completely absorbed, like it it eats up the solar wind. Moon surface just accepts the solar wind particles, they get deposited here, and as we know, this is a flow, it's like a wind. So they just move past the moon, and a cavity is formed on the night side, which is devoid of any plasma. We can call it as void. A void, like we imagine, a water flow around an object. So there is something like a cavity, void is formed behind the moon. So it sounds very simple, but is that so simple? Actually, it is not. That we came to know from Chandrayaan-1. As you know, Chandrayaan-1 is the first mission, Indian mission to the moon. And Chandrayaan-1 had 11 scientific payloads to study the different aspects of the sun, like surface composition, surface features, then search for water, and measure the atmosphere of the moon, etc. Of which I was associated with an experiment called SARA, which I will explain in next slide. And the SARA had two sensors, SENA and SWIM. This measures neutral atoms and this measures ions, basically for the solar wind interaction with the moon. Both of them are meant for that. So this shows the Chandrayaan-1 schematic, of which this is the, we call it as a top deck of Chandrayaan-1, this one, and is SENA and SWIM. And this box is actually, this arrow has to be slightly shifted. This is SENA. This box is the processing unit, which is the electronics box of the controlling the sensors. So SARA is mainly its objective, scientific objective, or it was meant to study the interaction of solar wind with the moon. What happens to the moon when the solar wind interacts? So this is the details. So SWIM basically measures ions. This is neutral. So there you can see here, this is the flight model, which is the basically the model which is used to, which was already flown on the Chandrayaan-1. So this is SENA SWIM geometry. And this is a zoomed in view where on the top deck, which I showed in the previous was a schematic. This is an actual picture where SENA and SWIM were mounted on the top deck of the Chandrayaan-1. And SARA was an international collaboration experiment with participation from ISRO, SPL, VSSC, and then Sweden, Japan, Switzerland, like etc. There were several other countries involved in it. And now what we found from SARA is that when the solar wind interacts with the moon, it doesn't simply get absorbed. A significant fraction of them gets reflected back. That is, so there is something, acting on the moon surface to, impart momentum and change their directions and then come out. So to collide with them, basically we can say. So these, this illustration represents how much it's the reflected, actually we say hydrogen, because these are hydrogen ions impacting on the lunar surface, and they get neutralized and then come back. So this is such a flux. So we can see that as a color bar indicates, as we go more to the yellow, the number is higher. That's it. So we can see that there are higher number close to the equatorial region of the moon, and then less towards the polar region. And such a quantity, when we quantify this, this value is something like 20% of the incident solar wind. So that much, like if 100 particles incident on moon, 20 of them comes back. And that solar wind flux, we say 10 10⁸ particles per centimeter square per second. So this number is 20% is significant. Now, second case. As I told initially, moon doesn't have a magnetic field, which is meant that moon doesn't have a global magnetic field like Earth. But moon has local magnetic field. Like certain areas of moon has magnetic field. Example, when we see the near side, the side of the moon which we see from the Earth, that is called the near. As you know, we see basically one side of the moon from the Earth. So, and on that side, if we consider, these color indicate the presence of magnetic field. The color indicates there are certain magnetic field on those regions. When we comes to the part which we can't see from the Earth, but it is seen by a satellite around the moon, we see that there are very strong magnetic field or very cluster of magnetic field sitting on the far side. So these are called the lunar magnetic anomaly. So like isolated magnetic field, or we can see the local magnetic field. And the strength of the local magnetic field is very weak when we compare to that of Earth. Like Earth, as I mentioned, the strength we talk in terms of 34,000 nanotesla. Whereas in the case of moon, it is something like 100 to hundreds of nanotesla. So this is very weak. But then there is a question whether this local magnetic field can block the solar wind and thereby protect the surface, like the case of Earth. Local protection, we say. It is something like this, like local. So whereas this is the global scenario for the Earth. So what we are considering here is like something like a quantity of 35,000 versus hundreds of nanotesla. Is it possible? Then Chandrayaan 1, from Chandrayaan 1, we came to know that it is possible. They form a structure, a very small scale structure like a magnetosphere. So they are called mini magnetosphere. Like as I mentioned before, magnetosphere is a terminology we use to represent such a shielding. So this forms a mini magnetosphere. So basically we can see this, we can interpret this as this represents the area where such magnetic fields are present. And this darkened area represents the area which is shielded by the solar wind, where the solar wind is blocked by the local magnetic field. So such a process happens. And here in this graph, we can see this cluster, this high colored area represents, actually they are the area of the magnetic field. And this color represents that the solar wind, higher amount of solar wind is deflected away from such areas. So thereby it is something like a shielding of these areas. So even the small scale magnetic field on moon can form an umbrella-like structure and protect the and it sort of shield the surface. And as I mentioned initially, we have day and night side of the moon, and night side we have this void. That's why I told when solar wind interact, there can be a void. But is it really a void? Actually, it is not. We find that there are certain solar wind particle which can enter this region. Solar wind can enter this void region close to the moon. We call it as near to the very like 100 kilometer near to the moon on the night side. There are many reasons for that. One reason, since we talked about the magnetic field, one reason is that this shows the moon again. This is the day side and this is the night side. And this is the magnetic field of the moon, local magnetic field. So when solar wind comes, these magnetic field, now we know that they change the direction of the solar wind. They deflect the solar wind. So when they deflect, some of them enters into the night side because their direction is changed now. Like it is illustrated here. They come and then they get scattered and come to the night side. And they are detected by Chandrayaan 1. And this is shows the orbit of Chandrayaan 1. They are scattered into the night side and they are detected by Chandrayaan 1. That's how we come to know that now there are plasma or solar wind that can access the night side of the moon. So night side is not really void. And there are many such discoveries, many more discoveries. And I highlighted a few for which I can easily better convey, not easily, better convey. So there are many such discoveries which you can always refer in if you search in Google and then ISRO website like that. I mean, we can discuss as well. Now coming to the Mars, then after in SARA, I was associated as a co-investigator. Now then let's to another object which is Mars. And as you all know, Mars has carbon dioxide dominant atmosphere. Like Earth atmosphere, we have nitrogen, oxygen, etc. Mars dominant gas is carbon dioxide, and the atmospheric pressure of Mars is like 1/100th of that of it. That it is that much low, very low pressure. And some similarities with the Earth is that Earth rotates 24 hours. Like we have one day. Rotation defines the day of a planet. We have 24 hours, which we call it as day, of which 12, roughly 12 hours day and 12 hours night, we say. Similar way, Mars also rotates 24 hours. Its rotation period is 24 hours. A day on Mars is so 24 hours. And because of the distance of Mars from the sun, it takes twice the time to move around the sun. So 1 year on Earth, like we call it as approximately 365 days. Here it will be double of that. That will be 1 Martian year. And Mars atmosphere is thin, and Mars does not have a global magnetic field, as I mentioned before. And the escape, because of which there's a solar wind impact on the atmosphere, those kind of processes are more on Mars as a direct access. Direct access of solar wind is more on Mars. And the atmosphere of Mars escape because they gain energy by these processes, and the outer atmosphere, outer part of the atmosphere is continuously escaping into the space. And other than the solar wind interaction, there are few other processes also which contributes to the escape. Now, to study the Mars, we had the Mars Orbiter mission, which is the first mission to the Mars from India. And there were several experiments to study the different features of Mars. And there's one experiment to study the atmosphere of Mars, which I was associated with. And that is called MENCA. MENCA stands for Martian Exospheric, actually neutral composition analyzer. And this, which is basically a mass spectrometer, which sends the atoms or molecules in the atmosphere of Mars. And from MENCA observations, we know that we determined the how the composition varies with the altitude in the Mars atmosphere. Composition of oxygen, like Mars atmosphere consists of oxygen, then nitrogen, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide. These elements, these molecules, how they vary with the altitude. And that too, our measurement happens on during the sunset time on Mars. So, and that was the first observations at the sunset time at this higher altitude, something like 265 kilometers and above. So this is what one important finding from MENCA Mars mission. And then we have found that in the atmosphere of Mars, there are slightly higher energy particles which are called suprathermal. In the atmosphere, we know they are like, particles are of small velocity. We don't really feel they are moving or they hit and those kind of effect. They are thermalized particles. Whereas in the higher altitude, we found that there are certain atoms which have higher energy, which moves faster. So they are suprathermal, and they are basically argon atoms. So suprathermal argon, the presence of suprathermal argon also has been detected on Mars. And there are many such discoveries. So now, as mentioned during the introduction, like when I was introduced into the audience, and it is mentioned that I work for Chandrayaan-2 also. So in Chandrayaan-2, we had an experiment to measure the atmosphere of Moon, and we have detected the presence of argon around the Moon. And so those results are already coming up. And then I work on Aditya L1 mission, where PAPA, as it was mentioned, PAPA stands for the Plasma Analyzer Package on Aditya, which basically measures the solar wind. As I introduced the solar wind, so PAPA will be measuring the solar wind at a point between sitting at a point between the sun and Earth continuously, which is called the first Lagrangian point. So it will have continuous visibility of the sun from there. So we look forward that we get very interesting results from these missions, and so the exploration continues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think
the way you have explained in very lucid manner the concepts of space weather to all the audience, I think they will all, I'm sure they all will be inspired to take up studies in space weather. And with that, forum is open for question and answers. So I can see few questions in the chat box. Very first question by Siddhita Surve: are solar winds harmful for Earth's atmosphere?
Not really in that way, because Earth, since Earth has very thick atmosphere. One thing is solar wind doesn't directly enter the Earth atmosphere because Earth has a magnetic field, very strong magnetic field, and those times when solar wind at times it get access. So at that time they interact with the upper atmosphere, we say, at atmosphere at a higher altitude. I mean, which is not the altitude where we live. It is much above that. They interact with them, they collide with them, and they lose their energy. They get deposited there. So that way, we don't really see them penetrating into the very low altitude. And similarly, because of these process, Earth atmosphere escape is also very negligible, because this happens at times only. This penetration happens at times, and so in that way, it is not the term like harmful. Harmful generally we say harmful to us sort of thing. So we don't really see. Rather, we see, where we get the spectacular aurora sort of things to see. Other than that, there are not real damage. But there are some events called, as I mentioned, like coronal mass ejection. So they associated with those kind of events when the density is very high. That is called as Chindamani rightly pointed out. That is called a space weather. A term called space weather. When these kind of events happens, then what happens is they induce certain currents that disturbs the our system. Like you would have seen some power grid damage. You would have heard of that in olden days, some power grid damage, and then satellites were shut off because of such events. So those are slightly we have to deal with them slightly in a cautious way, though those events are less in number. But we can't really say that okay, they will be always less or when they pick up like that, because it all is related to the solar activity.
Right. The next question is by Vivang. He's asking, what is the difference between a solar flare and a coronal mass ejection?
Okay. Yeah, in the solar flare, mostly we see an increase in the radiation part. Like we see a high increase in the or amount of radiation in the X-ray, ultraviolet, or visible also it's there, but visible part is already high. In the normal case, we see the maximum energy comes in the visible part, maximum of the amount. So we don't really there will be small modulation over that. But significant changes we see in X-ray, ultraviolet, those kind of regions, even in radio, microwave also. Whereas in coronal mass ejection, we see the chunk of mass coming out of the sun, like a huge amount. So when it comes out, it mixes with the solar wind, because solar wind is already flowing out every time. And this chunk of matter mixes with the solar wind, and the solar wind density is seen increased. It will increase the density of the solar wind and slightly change the velocity of the solar wind, like that. So it is like a mass thing, whereas flare is mostly related to radiation. And associated with the solar flare, there are some event called SCP, which is called solar energetic particles. That also comes up because these particles gain energy through acceleration, because all this happens because of the magnetic field of the sun in the sunspot. So through that they gain, some electric fields are generated, and this particle gain energy, then they come out. But their energy is something like mega electron volt range. They are MeV particles. And generally in the solar wind, the energy is typically kilo electron volt. So basically it's a radiation versus mass. Yeah.
Okay. So there are two questions which I'm coupling by Dr. Veena and Adinath Bobde. So one question is, kindly suggest how graduate students can get opportunities in ISRO. And the second question is, can microbiologists join ISRO? If yes, then how?
Okay, actually graduate, you mean, I think bachelor's degree. So
right.
Generally, bachelor's in engineering, generally ISRO recruits every year engineering graduates through a central system where they can apply and they have to appear for a written exam. And those who qualified are called for interview, and they finally appointed in ISRO in various centers, because ISRO has several centers across India. So those, they are distributed across the ISRO centers. So this is a very regular system through which engineering students of various background, like electronics and communication, mechanical engineering, like the various background, they get a chance to be part of ISRO. That is one thing. And the second is the micro. And then, yeah, if you consider the science stream, then actually generally people join ISRO based on the opportunity. So certain opportunities are called for those with the science background. So accordingly, we can apply and then appear for the interview and then a part of ISRO. That is also there. And then like physics, chemistry, those backgrounds. And then regarding microbiology, I'm not very sure. Maybe I will also have to check. Probably, yeah. Maybe I'll get back to this. I'm not very sure of this.
Okay. Next question is by Mr. Srinivas Lakshman, who is a space journalist. He's asking, can you please highlight some of the future interplanetary missions of ISRO?
Yeah, actually, as of now, I mean, I can talk only up to Aditya L1, which is there in the public domain, beyond which, I'm not in a position to reveal anything beyond. So I seek your apologies for the same. So maybe we can, I would request that we can probably discuss more on the science and related things rather than going to the policy matters, which is not, I'm not in a position to comment on any of those things. So sorry for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
yes, ma'am. I'm from Vikram Sarabhai Community Science Center, Ahmedabad. Yeah, I'm working in a Model Rocketry Space Science Lab. Actually, I have been visited in even Sriharikota and even that Bangalore, ISAC and URSC. So that time I was discussed with Dr. Krishnan. So he told me he's worked on the Expo set. I don't know about the right now what is the situation on Expo set. I want to little bit what is actually I'm not discussing more. Basically, I couldn't get the time to discuss with him. So I have to know about the right now what is the position and how they are reach to their work in that Expo set. So that's if you have any details, then I from.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for your question, but sir, yeah, unfortunately, I can't answer this. So
okay.
Maybe.
Oh, I think.
am I audible now?
I think she might have lost the connection.
Okay, no problem.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I think I got disconnected for some time.
Yes,
and network issues. At some required times, so these network fluctuates. Sorry. And yeah, I don't know whether you heard my reply to the previous question. That I can't comment anything further on that. Maybe we can discuss in private. That's it. Yeah.
Fine.
Okay.
No problem.
Okay. Next question. Like I'm asking. Since you have been discussing about the local magnetic anomalies, and since there is a reflected charged particle flux from the lunar surface or any other planet from where we, if the mission being planned, so do we actually consider the landing site based on these local magnetic and electric field anomalies?
Yeah, it is considered as one of the potential landing sites because of this shielding, because it shielded the surface. So that area, the space weathering is considered to be less. Like as you rightly pointed, the space weathering term, like when the solar wind interacts with the surface, there are some changes happens on the surface, and there are certain features seen on the moon. They are called swirls. So there are some areas where people see some increase in brightness when we see with the with our eyes, with camera. They see there are some areas where there are some brightness features are different, and one of the reasons it is attributed as because there are magnetic anomalies, and hence it is shielded from the solar wind, and that is changes this change in the surface features and the spectral characteristics. So because of these reasons, magnetic anomalies are considered as one of the potential landing sites. Yes.
So, I mean, one more question, sorry. So based on these magnetic anomalies, do they originate from the content of the local minerals or at that particular site on the...
Actually, yeah, okay. Have you finished? Yeah, maybe I
Yes, yes.
intervened in it. Okay. So yeah, actually, the reason for the magnetic anomaly is still an enigma. One of the the several possibilities are considered. One of them was the same as you mentioned, because of the compositional change. But over the years, because of several measurements, we now have a fairly good idea of what is the composition of the surface of the moon, and from there we understand that it is not because of the compositional difference. There is not much significant difference in the anomaly area. Then one of the accepted hypothesis for the lunar anomaly formation, magnetic anomaly formation, is because of the impact from the asteroid or meteors during the initial stage of moon formation, when moon was getting formed, and after that it was evolving through ages. At that time there was some impact on the moon, and because of which there are some shock waves created, and which sort of concentrated this plasma clouds in the region which is antipodal to this impact region. If you see this magnetic anomalies, the location of the magnetic anomalies, and when you travel through the center of the moon to the other side, which is called the antipode, you can find an impact crater. So most of the magnetic anomaly, not all, but most of them have an impact a crater, like a crater formed because of this impact, antipodal to the anomaly region. So it is mostly related now to the impact related processes rather than the compositional changes.
Right. So I can, yeah. Yes.
I have one question, ma'am. You talked about aurora and lights mostly in polar regions because of magnetic field. Means whatever is coming from sun. So why they are mostly seen in polar regions only, though we have the magnetic field and atmosphere all around the Earth. So, but it is very specific to the aurora is very specific to polar regions.
Okay, what happens is that, sir, when it is like we see it is like a dipolar field. So when the solar wind comes, that brings its own magnetic field, which is the interplanetary magnetic field. So at some point, they just opposite directly field at some because interplanetary magnetic field orientation, Earth's magnetic field is almost fixed, whereas interplanetary magnetic field direction changes. So at some time when they are oppositely directed, there's a process happens called reconnection. This is like a field cancellation, and it is like a reconnect. A new geometry is formed through which, and Earth's magnetic field stems from the polar region. So through these field lines, they access the polar high latitude, basically the polar region. So that's how this is mostly in the pole region. This is because of the footprint of the magnetic field, because it's a dipolar field. So wherever the particle enters, it cannot enter crossing the field. It has to follow the field lines. So when it follow the field lines, it comes like this, like an arch shape. So that happens mostly in the pole region. I mean, accessing. Although it may happen in the equatorial region of reconnection can happen in the equatorial region, but then the footprint of the magnetic field guide them to the polar region, sort of thing.
I can see here some interesting question by Prathamesh. Can we establish artificial magnetic field on moon to protect from solar winds?
Okay, that may be a bit tedious task, because across these are few tens of or hundreds of kilometers across, whatever we see the naturally occurring magnetic anomalies. So if we have to have cover the entire moon, then you need a very large dynamo field. Like in the case of Earth, the field is created because of the dynamo action in the core. There are charged particles in the core of the moon which rotates and then generates this magnetic field. So in the case of moon, since the core doesn't have such activities, then to have such a large dipole magnetic field, it would be very technically challenging, or maybe very tricky. So I find that may not be, maybe very localized field generation people can think of. But yeah, even in laboratories, when we see creating a magnetic field of that magnitude, those kind of things are difficult. So when we consider the moon, it will be very tricky. Yeah, maybe possible, but yeah, a bit complicated.
I can see a lot of questions. Maybe we can take couple of questions. I can see there are so many questions on if if humans settle on Moon or Mars, how one can actually use solar winds? Can it be used as a free source of energy, or even how to protect humans from solar winds?
Okay, so in the case of moon, yeah, this protection is something which we have to think of. Whereas in the case of Mars, since Mars have an atmosphere, solar wind doesn't directly come up to the surface. Like in the case of Earth, in the case of Earth, they get stopped at a much larger distance. And as we explained, aurora, because of the magnetic field, direction, they come to the upper atmosphere. Still, at a higher altitude only, in the higher latitude regions also. Whereas in the case of Mars, since magnetic field is not there, they come to the atmosphere, but they get stopped at certain altitude. They get, their energy get deposited and they get deflected and like that. So in that way, solar wind, we don't have to really worry about solar wind reaching the surface on the Mars. And one more thing is that Mars also has a crystal magnetic field like Moon. Mars have, but at a much bigger scale. So whenever the solar wind during maximum time, the solar wind speed is also higher, solar maximum time. So when they get this induced magnetosphere, we say, umbrella, it get compressed to such an extent that it directly interact with the crustal field also. So such processes also happens on Mars. So, but as such, at the surface, I don't really think that we need to really worry about shielding from the solar wind, rather than other things like, there are dust storms on Mars, which are very almost every time it happens on Mars. So those kind of, there can be intense also. They can last from few days to few weeks. So how to survive in such dust storm conditions? These kind of things are the ones which which will be more worrying to us. And similarly, using carbon dioxide to recycle and produce oxygen and thereby sustaining life, and then maintaining the temperature. As we would see, the surface temperature of Mars is lower, so to maintain the life there. So these kind of things would be more significant, I feel.
Yeah, I think there is one more question from a Facebook page of Nehru Science Center from Mr. Mukund Ketkar. Why some planets have magnetic field and some do not?
Yeah, okay, this it's a very big good and big question. This is because as basically the magnetic field comes from the core, dynamo action in the core. So where the core has a charged fluid, and then they rotate and then generate the field. So at some point, these are related to their evolution. Once they evolved, how these planets got evolved. So they are all born, as we all know, like they are all born from the cloud and dust around the sun. After sun is formed, whatever leftover cloud and dust, they clumped together and formed the planets. But after formation, they undergo lot of cycles, like changes, and in that they get hit by several asteroids like that, and they survive all these, and then they come to that. So during the evolution stage, some of these planets have their dynamo actions have stopped, and because of which we do not see significant field. When we see the case of Mercury looks similar to Moon in several aspects, but Mercury has a core which is active, and because of which Mercury has a weak dipolar field. It is dipolar still, and it is weak, but it still has. Whereas Venus and Mars doesn't have. And another important is that some planets have, they are this dipole axis is like generally if we consider this as axis, some have this like horizontal. So they were, during their evolution, they were hit in such a way that, the processes were in such a way that their axis itself has changed the orientation. So these kind of things happens because the processes which they have undergone during their evolution.
Okay. And since I think it's a very rare time that we get expert talking on space weather and space science, so I can see many questions which I'm coupling to one question, that how one can pursue space science or space weather.
Okay, yeah, space science, the normal way was like, the kind of, which I have also been through, was like we pursue science masters. And after that, we have PhD in the related field. So that is one way, like since the space science was as such was not really a curriculum at that time. So generally physics background, we go for a PhD in the space science area, because these are all basically governed by laws of physics. Then now, but I find that there are several universities which offer space science courses, so specialized courses. So those are really interested can opt to that course. And one option is the Indian Institute of Space Science and Technology, IIST, which is located in Trivandrum. So they offer specialized courses in space science and technology, both in engineering as well as science streams. So, and there are options to do the PhD also there. So there are similar institutes, other institute as well. So these are the options which we can explore if you are want to pursue a specialized course.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think with that, we come to the end of this session. And thank you, Dr. Dhanya MB, for joining us. And I think as a woman scientist, you are really giving a great significant contribution in the field of space science and space technology, and of course, Indian Space Research Organization. First of all, I also thank Dr. Ankush Bhaskar from VSSC ISRO, who has also played a pivotal role in organizing this session. Also great thanks to all the participating organizations, especially Umesh Rastagi sir from Nehru Science Center, and Suhas Naik Satam sir from National Center for Science Communicators, and Anil Mathur sir, who is also ex-ISRO scientist from Space Application Center, and now he has formed Indian Space Industries Exhibitors. And in fact, when we were, it was in a very short time, all these talks were arranged. And I thank all the participating organizations, their supporting staff for their great support. And without which I think this would have been very impossible. And least but very significant, the audience who has been really supporting all of us from all over India. And I request that keep continuously giving your support. And the next talk, what we have, we are starting at 4:30, and that talk will be given by Mr. N. Sudhir Kumar Ji, who is director from ISRO Capacity Building Program, ISRO headquarters, and will join at 4:30. That is going to be our next session. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
It will be available on Facebook and later also on YouTube. Those who have missed or maybe joined late, you can find out. It's very easy to find out our YouTube page and channel and Facebook page, Nehru Science Center. Just type, you will find it. Okay.
And feedback link has been shared in the chat box.
Yeah.
So please fill feedback link. Thank you all once again.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for joining us.